All right, welcome back, everybody. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely.
This time we're tackling Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. We've got articles, critiques, even some old acting guides. Should be a good one.
Yeah, this play, it's way more than just a love story, right? Like, it gives us this peek into the Elizabethan world and even reflects some anxieties we have today, even now.
So true. We're not just going to rehash the plot.
Yeah.
We're going deep on what it tells us about how people thought back then and maybe, even about ourselves now.
Yeah, totally.
So, first thing that struck me rereading this, Romeo. He's a lot deeper than I remembered from high school.
Oh, for sure. Easy to write him off as what, just a lovesick teenager?
Yeah.
But Harold Bloom, he's got this interesting take. Shakespeare wasn't going for simple with Romeo.
Okay, so what was he doing then?
Bloom argues that the way Romeo talks, his words, he actually kind of develops through that. Almost like he's listening to himself, realizing things he didn't know before.
Wow. I never thought about it like that.
Mm.
Any examples from the play?
Well, think about those early speeches when he's all hung up on Rosaline.
Oh, yeah.
Super flowery language, dramatic, right?
Yeah, totally.
But then he meets Juliet, and it changes. Like, his words are more direct, more honest.
So it's not just changing his mind about who he loves, it's changing how he thinks because of love.
Exactly. Bloom thinks Shakespeare was playing with this idea, this self-reflection through language. Pretty cool.
Yeah, that is cool. Makes you think about how we still use language today to kind of shape who we are.
Totally.
Okay, enough about Romeo for now. Another thing that popped for me, all the potions and poisons. Classic Shakespeare, right? Things are about to go sideways.
Right, but they weren't just there for plot. Tanya Pollard, she argues there's this deeper thing going on, like a fascination with that line between sleep and death, both in the play and real Renaissance medicine.
Wait, seriously? How?
Well, think about it. Juliet fakes her death with a potion, right? She looks dead. And Romeo, seeing that, kills himself.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I see it.
Even in their final moments, it's all mixed up, life and death, like interchangeable almost.
It's almost like he's saying love and death are, I don't know, two sides of the same coin or something.
And this blurring, this wasn't just on stage. Pollard says doctors back then, they were really worried about opium overdoses, people sleeping forever, real fear.
So the audience, they get that. It wasn't just, dramatic effect. It was their reality, too.
Right. And Pollard even says this whole blurring thing, it was like the theater experience itself, that suspension of disbelief. You accept the sword fights and magic potions are real for a bit.
Yeah. You're in a dream. Anything can happen.
Yeah.
But, thinking about those potions, they highlight that danger, too, right?
Yeah.
Especially for women.
Yeah.
And that makes me think about Romeo and his violence, that whole masculinity thing, two kinds of danger swirling around.
Really good point. It's like Robert and Watson and Stephen Dickey, they argue that even though you don't see it on stage, there's this threat of sexual violence always there.
That's kind of disturbing, honestly. We think of this as romantic.
Right. But think about how Romeo gets aggressive, especially when he feels humiliated or emasculated is how they put it, reflects a bigger anxiety about what it means to be a man, even back then.
And honestly, we are still dealing with that today. What does it mean to be a man? The whole violence thing, how men treat women.
Yeah, very much so.
It's not just some old play issue. It's now, too.
And get this, Dickey and Watson, they even say Romeo's choice of weapon, the sword, it's not random.
How so? I mean, it's a sword, right? Everyone uses swords.
They argue it's a symbol, too, because of its shape. Echoes those themes, like penetration and violation. Adds a whole other level to how we see Romeo's actions.
Whoa. Never thought about that in a sword fight.
Okay.
Okay, but if Romeo's all this, toxic masculinity, where does that leave Juliet?
That's where William McKim comes in. He contrasts Romeo, who's all about this, what he calls a death-marked imagination, with Juliet's desires. She's more grounded.
Death-marked imagination. What does that even mean?
McKim's saying Romeo's obsessed with these grand gestures, these romantic ideals, even if it's reckless. His thoughts are always near death, like he's seeking it out.
Ah, okay. Living in a fantasy world, not dealing with the real messiness of love.
Right. Juliet, on the other hand, she wants love, family, real intimacy, the stuff of life, not grand pronouncements.
So, more practical, down to earth.
And McKim points out, even how she uses language is different. She doesn't fight the darkness like Romeo. She tries to, domesticate it, make it her own.
Doesn't fear the dark side, just wants to shape it, huh?
Exactly. Even death, for her, it's not this scary thing. It's part of nature, a transition, even beautiful.
Huge contrast to Romeo. right? Like, she finds beauty in the cycle of life, even the dark parts. It's crazy how much Shakespeare packed into these characters. But speaking of characters,
Mm.
we got to talk about the nurse.
Oh, the nurse. She's always good for a laugh, right? But Lena Perkins Wilder, her work on memory in the play suggests there's more going on there. Specifically, that whole bit where she remembers Juliet being weaned, it's important.
Wait, seriously? I always thought that was just like comic relief.
It is funny, but Wilder ties it to how Elizabethans thought about memory itself. They didn't believe memories were just floating around. They thought they were organized, stored in physical places.
Like what, they had mental filing cabinets back then?
Kinda. Like using physical locations, rooms, buildings even, to help them remember. Associate a memory with a place. Easier to recall it.
Wow. Okay, so how does that tie back to the nurse and the weaning thing?
The nurse is using that memory tied to that specific time and place to make a point about Juliet, like showing how she's grown, her character. It's Shakespeare exploring memory, childhood, all that.
So not just a funny story, it's a window into their whole way of thinking about the mind. Wow.
Exactly.
And one thing I love about Shakespeare is the language, like those quotable lines, but also how he got everyday speech, slang, accents.
Oh, yeah, that's Norman Blake's jam. He says Shakespeare gives us this glimpse into how regular Elizabethans actually talk, because that stuff wasn't written down much.
I bet that was wild for audiences back then, especially the fancy folks. Did they even get all the slang?
It really makes you think, right? Like, was he pushing boundaries, using stuff that regular people would totally understand, but maybe the high-class folks wouldn't?
Makes it feel more real, more alive.
Totally. And Blake gives some cool examples, like, remember how we talked about dropping H's back then?
Yeah, it wasn't bad grammar, just how they spoke.
Shakespeare actually writes it that way sometimes. Like, spelling words how they'd sound, gives you a sense of the accents and dialects. He wasn't afraid to break the rules to make it real.
It's like time travel, but through language. Makes the
Oh.
characters more real, Like I could bump into them and get what they're saying.
Exactly.
Okay, so we got potions, swords, memory, Elizabethan slang.
Mm-hmm.
What else is in this stack of sources?
Well, we got to talk about Mercutio. This is where I geek out a bit, but Daryl Palmer analyzes him through ancient Greek philosophy, and it is mind-blowing.
You've been holding out on me.
Yeah.
Greek philosophy and Mercutio. Come on, spill it.
Remember how we talked about him being impulsive?
Oh yeah, big time. Like Romeo, but on fast forward.
Palmer connects that to this Greek idea of motion. Like, they believed everything's always in flux, changing, moving. It's this fundamental force driving everything.
So Mercutio is like a walking, talking example of that.
That's what he's saying. Think about it. Always moving, quick wit, shifting moods, fights. It's all this energy, this change that the Greeks were obsessed with.
Wow. So it's not just that he's like restless. He's tapping into this whole other idea about what reality itself.
Exactly. And Palmer says this adds a whole other level to understanding Mercutio and his part in the play.
Makes you wonder if Romeo and Juliet could have, dodged their fate if they were a little less like it.
It's a really interesting question, isn't it? Like, what's Shakespeare saying about passion versus reason? Can love even survive in a world where everyone acts without thinking?
This is so much more than I thought going in, I gotta say. Like, Romeo and Juliet is like an onion. So many layers.
It really is. We're just getting started, though.
Okay, good, because I'm ready for more.
All right, let's dive back in.
Back for more. Man, my brain is still buzzing from all that Romeo and Juliet stuff. Like, I thought I knew this play, but clearly not even close.
Right. It's crazy what you can miss, even with something so famous.
You said something before about the play being concerned with, like, penetration. I gotta admit, that's a little intense.
Yeah, it's definitely provocative. But Jennifer A. Lowe, she argues Shakespeare uses this idea both literally and metaphorically to explore power, vulnerability, all that.
Okay, I get the sword fights and stuff. That's pretty literal. But beyond that, how does it work?
Well, even the balcony scene, Romeo's literally entering the Capulet space, right? Their garden, private, to get to Juliet.
Right.
And metaphorically, he's trying to get past her defenses too, win her heart.
Oh, wow. Never thought of it like that. So even the romance has this, like, invasion vulnerability thing going on.
And Lowe goes even further. She says Shakespeare uses the stage itself, the entrances and exits, to play with this idea.
Wait, the stage?
She's saying the stage is like a body, and the actors coming and going, they're penetrating that space, creates this dynamic, between them and the audience, blurring what's real and what's the play.
That is so meta. So the theater itself is part of the meaning. Whoa.
Yeah, Shakespeare was always playing with what theater could do, how to really get the audience involved.
Speaking of getting involved, we were talking before about Shakespeare's language, like how he captured everyday speech, the slang, and all that.
Norman Blake, yeah, he's the guy for that. He gives us these awesome examples of like how Shakespeare used informal pronunciations, slang terms, different dialects even in his writing.
So it's like he's giving a voice to people who, back then, didn't really get heard.
Exactly. He makes Elizabethan society more real, includes all these voices, not just the high-class folks. It's one of the things that keeps his plays feeling relevant today, I think.
And it's not just the pronunciation, right? Like, Blake talks about how Shakespeare would use all kinds of slang words, informal phrases, and even different dialects to, like, give his characters more personality, show where they come from.
So like he's weaving this huge social tapestry with his language. Highborn, lowborn, educated, not. It's amazing, really.
Okay, so we've got the levers, the potions, the language, swords, even the stage itself. What else have we got?
All right, time to circle back to Mercutio.
I know. I get a little obsessed.
It's okay. Been teasing this all day. I'm ready.
Okay, so Daryl Palmer, he looks at Mercutio through this ancient Greek philosophy lens, and it just blows my mind.
Greek philosophy. Lay it on me.
Remember how impulsive Mercutio is?
Yeah. Dude was all impulse, all the time.
Well, Palmer connects that to this ancient Greek idea of motion. They believed everything in the universe is constantly in flux, changing, moving, and that's like a driving force behind everything.
Okay, I kind of see where you're going with this. You're saying Mercutio is like what? Motion personified? That's exactly it. His constant movement, his quick wit, changing moods, even getting into fights. It all reflects this underlying energy, this relentless force of change. The Greeks were all about this stuff.
I gotta admit, I'm a little skeptical. Seems like a stretch.
I get it. But when you dive into what Palmer's saying, it's really cool. Like, he points to specific speeches and actions, things Mercutio does that match up with this idea of motion, like that whole Queen Mab speech.
Oh, yeah, the one where he's describing this fairy?
Exactly. She's galloping through the night, scattering dreams, fancies. It's all about movement and change.
Okay, I'm seeing it now. So it's not just that Mercutio is, like, restless or whatever. He embodies this whole philosophical idea about how the world works.
And Palmer argues that this connection to Greek philosophy, it makes Mercutio's character even more meaningful.
It's crazy, man. Like, this play just keeps getting deeper and deeper.
It really does.
Okay, before we go too far down the Mercutio rabbit hole, tell me about Friar Lawrence. He's such a big part of the story, but I've always found him kind of mysterious.
He is an interesting one, right? David Salter says that to really get Friar Lawrence, you gotta understand the Franciscan order, historically.
The Franciscan order, what do they have to do with anything?
Well, Friar Lawrence is a Franciscan friar. And Salter says back then they had a bit of a, let's say, complicated reputation.
Really? Why? I thought they were, like, the peace-loving guys.
They were big on helping the poor, the sick, all that. But they also kind of challenged the church, the big guys. They were seen as a little subversive.
Ah, okay. Like the rebels of the religious world.
Pretty much. And Salter says Shakespeare plays with this in how he portrays Friar Lawrence. On one hand, he's a good guy, right? Kind, wants to help Romeo and Juliet. But he's also willing to bend the rules, be sneaky, to get what he wants.
So he's both sides of that coin, huh? Compassionate, but also cunning.
Exactly. And that's what makes him so interesting. Like, are we supposed to trust him? It keeps you guessing the whole play.
It's like he wants to do the right thing, but he's also stuck in this system, the church. Tough spot to be in.
Right. And his choices, even though he means well, they lead to tragedy. Another example of how Shakespeare doesn't do simple characters. They're not all good or all bad. They're just people.
That's why they feel real to us. Even now, hundreds of years later, we see ourselves in them, the choices we make.
Speaking of choices, those potions again. Tanya Pollard's point about them being like the theater experience itself. I keep thinking about that.
Me too. It's such a cool idea, but my brain's still trying to, like, fully grasp it. Break it down for me again.
Okay, so she's saying both those potions and watching a play require us to suspend our disbelief, to buy into something that's not actually real. The potions, they could literally change how people felt, perceived things. Theater does the same, but with our imaginations, We enter a different world.
Ah, I see. We know it's not real, but we choose to believe it for a little while.
And that's what Pollard says made those potions so fascinating to playwrights. They were this blurry line between real and imagined, which is what theater's all about. It's tapping into that human need for stories, to escape, to experience things that are impossible in our daily lives. And those potions, they become a symbol of that power.
But it's not just the potions themselves, it's how Shakespeare uses them.
Yeah.
Like, we, the audience, we know what's up, but the characters don't, and that makes it so intense.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like when Juliet takes that potion to fake her death and Romeo, he thinks it's real, so he kills himself. My heart every time. It's all about illusion versus reality, and Shakespeare was a master at playing with that.
It's incredible, right? He weaves together these ideas about theater, illusion, even science, all in a love story.
It's why he's Shakespeare, man. He got to the core of what it means to be human, our desires, fears, capacity for love and violence. And it still speaks to us today, but we're not done yet. Still got more to explore.
Okay, hit me with it. What else have we got?
And we're back for our final act of this Romeo and Juliet deep dive.
It's wild, right? How much we keep finding in this play.
I know, right? You think you know it, and then bam, whole new layers. Shakespeare at its best.
So, what else have we got left in this stack of sources?
Well, got to talk about the most famous part, right? The language. I mean, come on, who hasn't quoted, "Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo?"
Oh, for sure, for sure. But Shakespeare's language, it's so good, so beautiful, like music almost. But he also used it to build tension, show you who the characters really are.
Right. That's what Thomas Honegger digs into. He looks at how Shakespeare uses dialogue to build relationships, especially in the balcony scene.
The balcony scene. Wait, isn't that like the most romantic part? What's so complex about that?
Honegger's point is Romeo and Juliet, they actually talk in really different ways, adds this whole other level to their back and forth.
Really? I never noticed that. Like
Yeah.
how
Well, Romeo, he's all about those big pronouncements, metaphors, fancy words. Like he's trying to wow Juliet with how well he speaks, you know?
Yeah, that's Romeo for you. Always got to be dramatic. But what about Juliet?
She's way more grounded, practical. She asks questions, has doubts, thinks about what their relationship actually means, you know, for real life. Almost like she's trying to see past all Romeo's sweet talk.
So it's not just what they say, but how they say it that shows us who they are.
Exactly. And Shakespeare does this everywhere in the play, uses language to create all this meaning, all this emotion. Part of why his plays still work today, you know.
That makes you realize Romeo and Juliet is way more than just, a love story.
It's about, like, the core of being human. Language, history, philosophy, even a bit of science mixed in there.
Yeah, makes you think, makes you feel things, even after all these years.
Absolutely. It reminds us, you know, about the power of love, how bad hate can be, and how important it is to make good choices, even when your emotions are running wild.
It kind of makes you want to go read the play again, right?
Yeah.
See all the stuff we've been talking about, like, with fresh eyes.
I think that's a great idea. Maybe even pick up one of the sources we talked about. See what else you can find. There's always more to uncover with Shakespeare, you know?
Well, folks, that brings us to the end of our Romeo and Juliet deep dive. Hope you enjoyed it.
It's been a blast. And remember, this is just the start. Keep exploring this play. See what you find. You never know what you might discover, even about yourself.
Until next time, keep diving deep.